Hi, and thanks for listening. If you're awake, you're spending the night with Eve. It's just past 2:27 here in Monkhouse. The fog has settled in thick tonight, the kind that doesn't drift so much as lean against the glass. From the lantern room, the beam is still turning steady, cutting a pale arc through the mist every 14 seconds before it's swallowed again. The sea is quieter than usual. Not silent, just restrained, like it's waiting for something to decide itself. If you're new to Monkhouse, you should know the town keeps its own hours. Midnight is never truly the end of the day here. There's always a light burning somewhere along the harbor road, always a kettle switching on, always someone watching the tide longer than they intended to. The coast doesn't encourage early sleep. It stretches the night out gently and lets it sit. Earlier this evening, I walked the full spiral before coming on air. 67 steps from the base to the lantern room. I count them every time. Not because I need to, but because repetition has a way of confirming the world is still arranged properly. The metal rail felt colder than last week. Winter creeping closer. The mechanism room below is humming clean and level. No tremor in the gearing. No hesitation in the rotation. The light has not faltered tonight. It hasn't faltered in years. There were a handful of small calls just before 2. Nothing dramatic. A delivery driver on the East Road reported losing his radio signal for exactly 14 seconds. He noticed because he was listening to a late-night talk show out of Portland, and the host's voice cut mid-sentence before returning at the exact same pitch. 14 seconds is long enough to notice, short enough to dismiss. I suggested atmospheric interference. He agreed. The fog can play tricks on signal lines. It thickens sound. It bends transmission. That's ordinary physics. At Pier Row, a porch light blinked twice at 2:27, according to its owner. He timed it tonight just to be sure. 2 brief flickers, then steady again. He checked the wiring, said it was fine. He sounded almost amused, telling me. There's a tone people use when they want to hear how something sounds outside their own head. Once spoken aloud, things shrink a little. The church clock on Alder Street stalled again this morning. Same minute, 2:27. The maintenance volunteer insists it's mechanical drag in the cold air. Brass doesn't love dampness. Still, the timing is exact. It never sticks at 2:25 or 2:29, always that minute. The second hand hesitates, then it resumes. If you're awake when it happens, you feel it. A pause too deliberate to call random, too small to call meaningful. From up here, I can see the municipal building lights are on again. Third night in a row. The caretaker swears he locks up before 10. He sounded embarrassed when I asked him about it earlier this week. Said maybe he left the timer engaged by accident. It's possible. Buildings hold on to electricity the way they hold on to heat. They glow longer than expected. There was a longer letter slipped into the base mailbox tonight. No name attached. Neat handwriting. It reads, "The light isn't for ships anymore. That's all. One sentence, no explanation." The lighthouse was automated decades ago, though we still maintain the upper room for historical reasons. Officially, it's decorative. Unofficially, it remains functional. The beam still rotates. It still marks time across the water, even if no one admits they rely on it. I stepped outside onto the narrow walkway just before broadcast. The fog pressed in so thick it felt almost textured, like breath against skin. You can hear the tide even when you can't see it. There's a hollow pull against the rocks tonight, slower than predicted. The tide chart suggested a stronger draw, but the water is lingering. It does that sometimes when the temperature shifts too quickly. Or so the old fishermen say. A woman from Birch Row called at 2:10. She said her dog has been standing at the back door each night at the same time, facing the sea, unmoving. Animals respond to subtle pressure changes. That's the explanation I offered. She seemed relieved. Most people prefer pressure to mystery. If you're working tonight, hospital corridor, security booth, truck stop counter, you'll know the hour between 2 and 3 stretches longer than the rest. It's not just perception. Something about the stillness widens the edges of time. Conversations trail off. Machines hum louder than they should. You become aware of every second hand ticking. The harbor bell hasn't rung tonight. It usually taps gently when the wind shifts direction. Not loud enough to mark the hour, just a soft metal note brushing against its frame. Tonight, there's nothing, not even the small scrape it makes in light breeze. The air is too settled or too held. A fisherman reported seeing a figure near the breakwater just as the beam swept across. By the time it returned, the shape was gone. He told me it was likely spray-catching light. He said it before I did. People don't like leaving possibilities open. There's a pattern emerging in the calls. Not dramatic, not alarming, just consistent. Flickers, hesitations, pauses at 2:27, 14 seconds of something misaligned. If you were looking for coincidence, you'd find it. If you were looking for connection, you'd find that too. Monkhouse has always been generous with interpretation. The beam has completed another rotation. 14 seconds, exact. It crosses the headland, glides over the roofs along Harbor Lane, skims the silent municipal windows, then sweeps back to open water. Every sweep reminds you the tower is still anchored, still functioning, still deliberate. A young man called in earlier, voice low, almost embarrassed. He said he walked the cliff path and felt certain someone was walking behind him at 2:27. Not running, not approaching, just matching his pace. When he stopped, the sensation stopped. When he turned, there was nothing there. Fog distorts depth, sound doubles. Your own steps echo back differently. That's what I told him. He thanked me and hung up quickly. The spiral staircase carries sound in strange ways. If you stand halfway up and listen, you can hear the mechanism turning below, like distant breathing. I've known that sound since childhood. My father used to bring me here when the Lighthouse was still officially staffed. He said a steady light meant steady ground. I've always liked that phrasing. If you glance at your clock tonight and it reads 2:27, don't rush to adjust it. Let the minute pass naturally. Notice if it feels longer. Notice if it feels ordinary. The difference is subtle, and subtlety is often mistaken for imagination. There was a brief report from the petrol station on the bypass. Forecourt lights flickered twice. No breaker trip, no visible surge. The clerk laughed when he told me, said the place feels bigger when the highway is empty. Highways shrink towns during the day. At night they return the space. The fog outside hasn't lifted. It hasn't thickened either. It's suspended, the kind that blurs the boundary between sky and sea. From here it feels as though the lighthouse isn't rooted in rock at all, but floating. The beam cuts through nothingness, creating its own horizon each time. Another letter arrived last week that I didn't mention then. It said simply, "It starts at the light." I assumed it was poetic metaphor. People enjoy assigning meaning to structures. Lighthouses carry symbolism easily. Guidance, warning, persistence, but structures don't begin things. They respond. The tide has finally begun to withdraw. Slower than expected, but moving. You can hear the faint shift against the rocks. A hollow exhale. The water is colder than last month. That's normal for this time of year. Cold water carries sound differently. It amplifies some frequencies and dulls others. That could explain the radio interference. It could explain the bell's silence. If you're lying awake, ceiling above you dark, house quiet except for settling wood, you might notice how certain minutes feel heavier. Not dangerous, just weighted. Monkhouse has always had weighted minutes. Generations here have marked time by tide and light more than by clock. The municipal building lights have just gone out. Abruptly, all at once. Perhaps the timer finally corrected itself. Or perhaps someone remembered to flip a switch. It's hard to tell from this distance. I've lived in Monkhouse my whole life. I've watched storms shear planks from the pier and summers dry the harbor mud to cracked patterns. I've seen the lighthouse beam disappear completely in snow and return as though nothing happened. Towns change slowly. They don't lurch. And yet, there's something about this particular stretch of night that feels fractionally off-center. Not enough to call disruption, enough to notice. The beam completes another sweep. 14 seconds, perfect. If you're on the cliffs, you'll see it brush past your shoulder. If you're inland, you might catch its glow reflected faintly against low cloud. If you're asleep, you won't notice at all. Someone asked earlier why I keep count of rotations. I don't, not consciously. But when you live beside repetition, you absorb its rhythm. 14 seconds becomes instinct. You sense when one rotation runs long. Tonight they're exact. If you hear footsteps outside and see nothing when you look, it's likely your own echo. If your clock stalls briefly at 2:27, it's likely condensation in the mechanism. If your porch light flickers, it's likely wiring adjusting to cold. Likely is a useful word. The fog has shifted slightly now, thinner along the headland. The beam stretches farther before dissolving. The sea is visible again in narrow bands, silver where the light touches it. Hi, and thanks for listening. If you're awake, you're spending the night with Eve. The lighthouse is steady, the tide is withdrawing. The town is quiet, though not entirely asleep. If you glance at your clock in the next few minutes and see 2:27, let it pass. Some minutes simply linger. That doesn't mean they're trying to hold you. Keep a small light on if you need to. The beam is still turning. I'll be here for the next rotation. Good night.